Welcome back. So, uMkhonto weSizwe parties Lucky Mandana challenged the planned private partnership model for the rail and freight industry, saying that it would undermine the state. Montana sits on Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Transport. He joins us this evening to comment on the Transport Minister's budget tabled today. Mr. Montana, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I do want to start with this, if you'll allow me. You've had quite a lot to say, though, about the budget and plan presented by the minister. So just give me your overall assessment on the quality of the plan and budget that was put forward by the minister. Your views.
Well, good evening, Naledi, and good evening to the viewers of Newzroom Afrika. Look, we are disappointed in this in the budget being tabled. Of course, in number terms, last year the budget or the adjusted budget of the Department of Transport was about 86 billion rands, and this year I think it's about 95 billion rands. So it's quite enormous resources. Of course, in the bigger scheme of things, there are industries that should be generating even more additional resources than the allocation. The minister's budget is, of course, based on the private sector participation model. I'd emphasize that we do not have a problem with private sector participating, but the specific model you follow is very important. You need to understand your industries, you need to understand where costs are, you need to understand where you will unlock value. And when we look at that, it's based on a notion that just by bringing the private sector in itself, and I made the point that they believe that just bringing the private sector is inherently efficient. I mean, these are based on orthodox or outdated kind of stories. So if you look at what I said and what I included in my speech on behalf of uMkhonto weSizwe, we are basically putting a picture. We are not only criticizing the minister and the government. You'll see, for example, in my speech, I dealt with quite a lot of alternative policies that should be pursued to change the transport trajectory, to change the travel experiences of people, how to improve our ports and railways. So it is not just a criticism. We are putting a coherent view, but as I said to the minister in Parliament today, there are better alternatives, and that's not what government is pursuing. Yeah. So this was the thrust of what we were saying today.
I do want to save the alternatives for later on in our discussion as we start to look at the sort of recommendations that would be made by the MK party on how we deal with particularly the rail and freight industry. But let's sit with the issue that you've raised around the private sector participation model. In your speech, you've gone on to say that the private sector will be left with no option but to increase prices without vertically integrated network industries like transport and energy, and their operational costs will skyrocket. At the risk of sounding quite technical, unpack what the real challenges that you see really are with this model.
Well, look, in a where you've got what we call vertically integrated, let's say Transnet, where you've got rail, ports, and everything working together. Of course, costs. You know, one side of the business subsidizes the other. Society doesn't carry the true cost of that. So once you remove them, because you want what you call a cost-reflective environment, you want to see the true cost of a particular business. What we call network business do not work that way. They need support structures. So when you change all of that, the cost of doing business in the economy increases. So business operates like that. If the cost goes up, they pass the cost to society, to their own consumers of their products. So that's what will happen, and we think that is not the right model to take. If, for example, you take what the minister has done in respect of Transnet freight rate, they split that into two: what you call Transnet the freight operations, or freight rail, and what we call Transnet Infrastructure Manager, what you call TRIM. Now, when you look at the TRIM, without any significant income from operations, it will require government support. So why then do you bring a private sector? If because the story is the private sector will bring investment, but TRIM would require for it to survive and keep on operating or maintaining our rail system, it will require quite a huge investment by government. So it doesn't make sense. It's an administrative change. It doesn't bring any efficiency. We don't see any efficiency gains out of this exercise. And we think that the policy, the private participation model that is being followed, we think it's quite misplaced and it's not in line with the long-term needs of the country.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the alternative that you'd put on the table?
Well, look, I think we say we need a vertically integrated Transnet as an example. Of course, you need to implement quite a lot of operational efficiencies. You need to look at your costs. For example, if you run a train from Johannesburg to Durban, you need to make sure that you don't run a train with carrying cargo and then it comes back empty. It's one example. How you deploy, for example, your locomotives, your staff. You know, there's quite detailed operational efficiency measures that you can bring to make sure that this is an efficient business. Now, you can't say just because some of these things are not happening, the private sector is the solution. And that's what we are opposed to.
Okay. I do want to speak to one of the examples that you've made, though, in your own presentation in response to the minister's budget. You make mention of, and many South Africans remember this with great shock, that one December when we had the Boksburg explosion. And you talk about the reason why we have incidents such as those is because of the amount of pressure that is being put on the trucking industry. Just please unpack that for us.
Well, look, the point they're making, and it's a very simple point, is that, you know, when you run a transport system, you deploy the right mode in a particular corridor, depending on the capacity requirements, if it's a freight side, if it's a passenger side, depending on the number of people that are traveling on that particular corridor. What we have in the country today is a situation where the balance between, and this dates back, and I trace it back to the late 1980s, when the transport system was deregulated. We've seen the rise of trucks, for example, moving even, you know, heavy cargo, which is not supposed to be on the roadside, it's supposed to be on the rail side. That is why when you go, for example, the uMkhonto, the municipality, they complained how trucks are destroying their roads, because that freight is supposed to be on rail, not on trucks. But what happened in 2018, after Transnet declared a profit, I think that what happened there is that the government decided that, look, they're going to undo what Transnet has achieved. They're going to cancel even the locomotive contract, claiming that that is state capture and all of those things. The whole entire railway system collapsed. And that is why you find that even more trucks on the roads. And I'm saying that instead of the minister being preoccupied with private sector participation, one of the major immediate challenges that she must solve as a Minister of Transport, and she's got the instruments, she's got the regulations, is to ensure that we restore the right balance between road and rail. Rail is designed for heavy cargo.
You made, yeah. Apologies, I'm stepping in because you make quite the allegation as well, though. You say the Minister of Transport and Minister of Finance will not tell you that a few months ago, the National Treasury asked PRASA to cut down on the number of trains to be manufactured?
No, it's not an allegation. Let me tell you, as a matter of fact, that in the letters which we've signed off, the National Treasury had wanted PRASA to cut down the production or the manufacture of the new trains. You recall that this is one of the contracts that I've signed because of the constraints or the austerity measures that they were taking. But I'm saying that when the budget was presented, the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Transport were presenting this as it is a big thing. No, the reality is they wanted to cut the number of trains that are being manufactured, but only change their minds when they realize the penalties that will be imposed on PRASA when the numbers are cut are going to be actually far more than the 19 billion rands that they've allocated to PRASA for the purpose of rolling stock. So it's a fact. They can dispute that, but there are letters, for example, that shows that they were trying to push that the production numbers should be reduced. But today, they're the ones who are singing and say, no, we are changing the rail system in the country. But those of us who know the truth, who know the facts, we can't be misled in that way.
All right, I need to move on to other themes, though. You talk about the taxi industry, and I think this is incredibly important. You know, The many times that we've had the taxi industry on this show talking about the challenges that they faced, they've talked about the resources that they need to be able to be profitable as an industry. You've gone on to say that the taxi industry, the only black-owned and controlled sector of transport, is not shown the respect that it deserves as the largest public transport mode in the country.
Well, if the taxi industry moves over 68% today of our commuter traffic, clearly you can't have a budget of 15.9 billion rands for 2025 for public transport. And what the taxi industry gets out of that, number one, it is not subsidized as an industry, which means therefore that it passes all the cost to the commuters. So when you leave Soweto, you work in Johannesburg or Rosebank, or you are in Kailicha, you work in town, the cost of travel is huge. That's number one. Number two, and because it's not subsidized. But if you look at the allocations, the department has got two specific projects. They've got the ones of taxi gratuity, which emanated from the time of the of COVID. The taxi industry last year was given 300 million. This year is given just about 410 million rands. And on the taxi empowerment side, they're given 110. So out of a whopping 15.9 billion rands on public transport, the taxi industry just is given in a disjointed way about 500 million rands, which we think is inadequate. It doesn't actually support where government doesn't give support where it's due. And so that is one of the things. Let me quickly add another related point. If you look at some of the resources that are spent, last year government gave subsidized bus operations. Your Padco, your Golden Arrow in Cape Town, all these bus companies that are subsidized, they got 7.7 billion rands. This year they're given 8.8 billion rands. Yet the taxi industry is given 500 million rands. Yet it moves 3 times more the number of the subsidized bus industry. So you could see that the minister is not helping us solve these problems. Public transport doesn't feature. If you talk about rural transport, we know that a lot of our people travel at the back of bakkies or they walk. There's no subsidized transport there. And I'm making the point that introduce frequent public transport in the rural areas. And it's possible. For example, if you expand, the minister revise the mandate of PRASA so that it's not only focused on the urban areas, it's also focused on to assist rural districts. We've got buses, we've got trains. We are able to make sure that, let's take in the rural areas, every hour on Saturday, there could be a bus service for children that walk long distances. You can have buses, PRASA can assist or work with rural districts in making sure how you fund it and the details can be worked out. But I think that is possible. But it requires a bold decision by the minister for her to go to cabinet and say, I think that let's change and amend the legal mandate of PRASA to be able to deliver on that. So I think all of these things are possible, they are practical, and will contribute to the solutions. Will not only criticize, but will contribute to make sure that we change the experiences of our own people. So
just one last issue that I want to look at, the road accident fund. The minister obviously talking about needing to deal with the governance and legislative issues at RAF, but I don't know what you put on the table as to how we correct things at RAF, especially now that SCOPA is looking at having an inquiry into operations and certainly the leadership and management of RAF.
Look, I think my view working with the RAF, I think that they had, of course, a good CEO in Collins Letswalo. If you look at the reduction in legal costs, because the key thing about ask anyone in the township or in the villages, they'll tell you that we claim our lawyers got money, but we only got just a small amount out of that, and the lawyers take everything. So the lawyers have been feeding on this thing. What Collins Letswalo has done has been able to change that trajectory. And we think that, of course, the department, the minister and deputy minister have indicated to us that they've got bold plans in respect of the road accident fund. I don't want to run ahead because we are not government, we are an opposition party. We'll wait for them to table all of that. I'm taken aback by what the SCOPA is doing, because I think SCOPA is playing an important role. But SCOPA must work with another committee of transport. If you look in terms of what happens at REF, the Portfolio Committee on Transport is responsible for that. So it requires that both committees on Parliament cooperate so that we find a lasting solution, and not to do an individual thing as a committee. Well, it's within their rights. I can't take that away from them. But I think that the time has come so that we build on the successes and the enormous work that Colin Chabane, I'm sorry, not Colin Chabane, but Collins Letswalo has done. If you look at the finances of the REF, it has made tremendous progress in the last 4 years. And part of it was to ensure that we curtail the money that goes to lawyers so that they don't feed on the carcass of the road accident fund. It fulfills the mandate that was established for, which is to ensure that it assists those people who were involved in accident, who are injured. And currently, that's not. We are seeing a lot of pressure from the private sector, from lawyers. They don't want Collins Letswalo because he's made changes, and some of us will never agree to that.
All right. Lots of contention, of course, to what you've said, but we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Montana. Lucky Montana there of the MK Party, also part of the Portfolio Committee on Transport, giving their perspective on the Transport Minister's budget delivered today. And, of course, really tackling a few of the issues that were raised by the Minister, saying that that budget did not inspire, according to the MK Party.